Hello there. Welcome back to the Level 2 lessons for the Star Wars Unlimited Judge program. As always, I'm your host Jonah, and this lesson is the second of two looking at decks, deck lists, and deck legality. Today, we'll be looking at marked cards and how to identify them, as well as how to perform a deck check in a timely manner, and what our goals are when checking decks. As always with policy, this is an area that is continually being refined, and will grow and evolve as play also continues to evolve. This does sometimes make it a bit of a challenge to both learn and teach, so this is likely a lesson that will similarly evolve over time. When we're talking about marked cards, it's easy for us to agree that if a player is able to know what card they or their opponent is going to draw, that can grant them a significant and unfair advantage. Cards that are marked, identifiable when face down and supposed to be hidden information, provide that advantage. The challenge comes first in agreeing on what makes a card marked. There are many ways that cards and sleeves can be marked. The corners can get dinged up, there's warping along the top of the sleeves from long use, cards themselves are warped, dirt and scuff from being played a lot, a difference in color due to manufacturing processes, or even sun bleaching. In fact, with practically every card or sleeve, if you look close enough or long enough, you can find something that distinguishes it from its neighbors. But we're not worried about all of those minor imperfections. If you have to lay your head down on the table and carefully examine each card and compare it to its neighbors to point out the difference, or you hold the deck in a particular angle in a particular light and thumb through it, and that shows you as a player something, those actions will be obvious and apparent if a player is doing them during an event. This means that as you look for marked cards, it's important to realize that some marks aren't problematic on a practical level. In addition to those super minor errors, there's also super obvious ones. If a player has a deck of white sleeves and one card in a black sleeve in the deck, that player can't reasonably gain an advantage from that. As soon as that sleeve shows up on top of the deck, their opponent's going to be like, hey, why do you have a card in a black sleeve in your deck? Chances are that's probably just a card from another deck, or an unsleeved card in the middle of a deck. These aren't real issues because there's no way for the player to gain an advantage from them. If your opponent's just sitting there with 4 sleeved cards in their hand and 1 unsleeved card, your opponent's going to be like, hey, what's going on there? That's not something that's just going to slip into a game. It's the stuff in between that we really care about. Now, if you discover marked cards, the issue needs to be addressed. If you believe the player is aware of these marked cards and may be taking advantage of them, the head judge should investigate for cheating. If you believe that it's an innocent error, which is the vast majority of cases, then the issue needs to be remedied. The cards or sleeves that are marked should be replaced, and the player issued a warning penalty along with 1 penalty point. If there are only a few marked sleeves or cards, and the sleeves of the sideboard cards are unmarked, the player can unsleeve those sideboard cards and then re-sleeve the main deck cards, so they don't actually need to acquire new sleeves. However, sometimes a significant portion of the deck will need to be re-sleeved, and the player will need to acquire new sleeves. Assist the player in re-sleeving their deck to expedite the process. One person unsleeving and the other sleeving can save significant time. If you believe that the player is not cheating, that the number of cards needing re-sleeving is significant, and that the advantage the player would gain by completing their match with these cards is very minor, you can have the player replace the sleeves at the end of the match. If you ever do not have a player change marked cards immediately, you can let them know that they're receiving a warning for marked cards and to check with you at the end of the round, but do not tell them the specific marks if you are not fixing them immediately. If you tell them what the marks are and then have them play a game, they're now going to play a game knowing about marked cards in their deck. Therefore, delaying the fix should only be done with extreme caution and careful thinking. If cards, not sleeves, are marked and cannot be reasonably played in the event, they need to be replaced. The player should try to acquire replacements from their collection, other competitors and friends, or vendors on site. If they are unable to do so in a timely manner, approximately 5 minutes, and you have reason to believe that the cards became marked during the event, the head judge can replace them with temporary proxies for this event alone. If the cards were not marked during the event, they need to be removed from the deck. If the player is unable to replace them, this will likely result in an issue that is resolved like a deck problem for having too few cards, and they will be replaced with random sideboard cards until replacements can be found. No penalty beyond the mark cards warning should be issued, even though we're fixing this like a deck problem. The deck list should be updated to match its new state, and can be reverted to its original order if replacements are found without further infraction, again like deck problems. If more cards are marked than the player has sideboard cards, they are unable to play matches until they find suitable replacements. This player is not disqualified, but will receive match losses each round until they find replacements. Once they find replacements, they're able to return to participating fully in the event. Let's talk a little bit about deck checks. What is the goal of deck checks? They are a preventative measure. While a good goal for deck checks is to check 10% of the field, that only checks a very small percentage of the decks actually presented. With a 100-player event, there will be 7 rounds of play. Checking 10 decks, performing 5 total deck checks, hits that 10% mark. However, over the course of 7 rounds, there will be several hundred matches, and all of them will be at least 2 games, some of them 3 games, at least 1,000, maybe significantly more games, or decks will be presented over the course of the Swiss rounds. So we're checking 1% or less of the decks presented. So while we may be catching issues when we perform deck checks, it's very likely that some number of small errors, like someone forgetting to de-sideboard and not realizing until after game 1 because the cards never came up, we're not going to catch the majority of actual deck problems. And that's okay. The purpose of deck checks is to be seen performing them. At events without deck checks, malicious players pick up on that and recognize that they have opportunities to take advantage of that lack of scrutiny. When deck checks are being performed, there is a much, much higher risk associated with intentionally cheating in this way. When performing a deck check, one of the most important parts is making sure that the players and other players in the area are aware that a deck check is occurring. The way you handle this occurs during what is known as the swoop, when you pick up the decks. This section on swooping is going to be somewhat abbreviated with bullet points, and will take time in future lessons to cover the mastery of deck checks, as they're logistically complicated and have many moving parts, which means that there's always room for improvement. So, let's go how you should go about swooping for a deck. First, select the table to check. Every table should be eligible for a deck check. It's important to check tables in the middle and end of the event, as well as the top tables, and even tables where you've checked one player before. Every player deserves a fair event, and no player should be able to say, I'm at the back of the event, or I've already been deck checked, I'm not going to get deck checked again. Many event softwares offer a random tables printout that lets you select from a list or be given a specific table to check. Sometimes a player, judge, or other tournament participant has raised a concern about a specific deck, and so you'll target them for a deck check. And towards the end of the event, especially if you have coverage, you'll want to ensure that all potential top 8 competitors are checked. Game losses issued in single elimination portions are very impactful and a very big feel-bad moment for the competitors and for the stream if you have one. Getting all of the top 8 competitors can be challenging because top players can intentionally draw their final round or 2 and not have to play, therefore they're not presenting decks, which makes it difficult to perform deck checks, so you have to predict who's going to make the top 8 earlier. You can see how this gets logistically complicated, and there are a lot of pressures at play here. Second, you're going to want to grab a buddy. If possible, you'll want someone with you at all times throughout the deck check. For the swoop, where you come in and pick up the decks, having someone with you allows them to answer calls so that you can focus on picking up the decks in an appropriate window. Then, step 3, you're going to want to pick up the decks. As we discussed in the previous lesson, decks aren't considered decks for the purposes of tournament integrity until they have been presented to the opponent for shuffling or cutting, so you need to wait until both players have presented. However, you also want to ensure that you pick up the decks before either player has drawn opening hands, as this can add significant logistical challenges, and in general, just avoid it. If the deck check that you're targeting, they draw opening hands, pick a different table, go somewhere else. It's just easier to swap tables than to try to perform a deck check where players have seen hands, because then you have to preserve that information throughout the deck check, and players have many, many questions. Deck checks can happen at the beginning of Game 1, beginning of Game 2, or at the end of Game 3 before players have de-sideboarded their decks. When you do approach for a deck check, let the players know that you'd like their deck and their deck box along with their sideboard for a deck, and that you'll deck check and that you'll be back in just a few minutes. I like to throw in that it's a complimentary deck check that sometimes gets a good chuckle, but otherwise you generally want to make this as stress-free as possible. Oftentimes, players will ask to use the restroom during this time, and that is perfectly good. It saves everybody a little bit of time. When you do this, you're going to want to check how much time is left in the round, so you can issue an appropriate extension when you return with the decks. This is also a good time to check to see if the player has presented their sideboard separately, or if it's remained in the deck box for the duration of the match. You also want to confirm with players who they are, so that you know which deck belongs to which player name, so when you're actually pulling up deck lists and when you're returning decks, you can pair things a little bit more smoothly. Then, you're going to want to take the decks to the deck check area. You should ideally have an area away from players to perform these checks. It allows you to lay out the decks fully and not give away information, have deck lists out, as well as to have conversation about potential concerns with other judges without having those in more public spaces where players can hear. You're also going to want to get deck lists ready. If you have paper lists, ideally a third person has already pulled them from your pile and has them presented to you. Otherwise, you're going to pull them yourself, have your partner pull them, or pull them up in a digital tool if you're using a digital deck list tool. Then begin the check with your buddy. You should start with one deck and one deck list, and your partner should take the other to ensure efficiency. Also, having a colleague nearby means that you can consult with each other immediately for any potential concerns. However, frankly, with smaller staff sizes, this is not always possible. It's important to keep some judges with an eye on the floor. This might mean that you're doing a deck check on your own, or it might mean performing the deck checks closer to the event. Now, for deck checks themselves. For a beginning of round deck check, the first thing I do is check the sideboard. Most issues come from failure to de-sideboard or removing too many cards. Because the sideboard is only 10 cards, it is easier and faster to check, and so if there's a problem, I find it very quickly. You can also do a quick mark cards check on the deck as it was presented to you. Just quickly look at the backs and edges of the card to see if anything sticks out to you, and count to 50, or the appropriate number for various formats and bases, just to ensure that you have the right number. Once you've completed these two steps, checking the sideboard and counting the card and looking for marked cards, it's time to sort. You'll have to find a sorting method that works for you. Some folks sort by individual card, laying out 20, 30 piles in front of them. Some sort by cost, color, or type. I recommend sorting the same way the deck list is sorted. For melee deck lists, that's by units, separated into ground and space, events, and upgrades. I do two quick sorts. I just sort all of the units in one pile, non-units in the other. Then I go through the units pile, separating into ground and space, and I go through the non-units pile, going events and upgrades. These sorts are very quick and don't require me to think or identify cards. I just look at where the art is and where the symbols are. I'm breaking the task into smaller, more manageable chunks. Then I simply go down the deck list and pull out the cards on the deck list. This starts with ground units, and this process ensures that I make sure that every card on the list is in the deck, and that every card in the deck is on the list. If you lay out the deck, sort it, and then just confirm that every card in front of you is on the deck list, it's possible that there are cards on the deck list that aren't in the deck. Once the deck contents are verified, I reassemble the deck and check again for marked cards. Sometimes a pattern will be visible when several cards with the same markings are next to each other, and I just finished sorting the deck, so I can identify these patterns more easily. It's important to note that there are often innocent explanations for concerning markings. Cards in sideboards see less play, and therefore have less wear and tear than main deck cards, and consequently can appear marked in relation to those main deck cards. Some players may double sleeve high value cards to protect them, but not the rest, making them stand out a little bit more. Other times, players run out of sleeves partway through sleeving a deck and get a different print run, which might have a slight color variation despite being the same product. There are a lot of very innocent and honest explanations for why patterns might appear. Now, if you do identify marked cards, whether there's a pattern or not, test yourself to ensure that the mark is significant enough. I recommend taking the deck and putting it on the table like you're playing the game. Then quickly go through the deck, spending less than a second on each card, putting them into two piles, marked and not marked. Once you've gone through the deck, flip over the cards that you've identified as marked, then do it again to ensure that you find those cards consistently and it wasn't a fluke. If the cards you didn't identify as marked are showing up in this process, or the cards that you did identify as marked are not showing up, then it's probably not marked cards and you can return the deck to the player. This is also important for when you talk to the player and show them the marked cards. If you're able to consistently pull specific cards from their deck without looking at the card faces and without spending significant amounts of time examining them, that has a real impact on players. However, this can also backfire. If you perform this magic trick and don't reveal the cards you raise concerns about, then it's very difficult to issue marked cards in Fraction because even you can't meaningfully identify the cards in question. Now, once both decks are checked, return the decks to the deck boxes as they were given to you and bring them back to the players. Most players haven't been deck checked before, so it's important to remind them of a few things. First, they'll be getting a time extension, the time since you left with the deck checks, plus an additional 3 minutes. I want to set some expectations, standards, and set a challenge out for you. A fast deck check should result in a 7-minute time extension, 4 minutes for the complete deck check itself, plus the additional 3. That includes the time walking back and forth from the deck check area. An average deck check should result in an 8-minute time extension. A no-issue deck check, no marked cards, no deck problem, no deck list problem, should almost never result in a 10-minute time extension. These are aspirational numbers, a challenge for you to meet. A lot of folks performing their first deck check will take 8, 9, or even 10 minutes to perform the deck check itself, resulting in an 11 to 13-minute time extension. But I want to get those numbers down. Not meeting these numbers isn't failing, but I want to encourage you to get efficient with checks. Not just for the tournament progression, although saving time is great, but also for the player experience. The longer players are sitting around without their decks, the more concerned and frustrated they'll get, and that reaction can cause them to play worse or simply have a less enjoyable time at the event. We give players the extra time, these extra 3 minutes, because their decks have just been sorted, and so they need to shuffle thoroughly. In the case of mid-round deck checks, let the players know that their sideboarding decisions have been maintained, but that they can confirm things are the way they expect them to be. Finally, for end-of-round deck checks performed after the match is concluded, any penalties issued apply to this round. This means that a game loss penalty may change the outcome of the match, or potentially have no impact depending on what the match result was. We're only scratching the surface here, but the best way to get better at these skills is to practice in real life. Ask your friends to submit deck lists to you and perform deck checks, time yourself, and see how fast you can get sorting decks you're not familiar with. Identify marked cards, and suggest your friends replace sleeves. We'll of course be back to discuss these more in future lessons and broadcasts, but this is an area you can practice without matches being played or a tournament being run. If you're watching this on YouTube and you want more level 2 lessons in your feed, go ahead and subscribe. Join us Tuesdays and Fridays on twitch.tv/swoo_judges for live broadcasts covering the content of these lessons as they're released, and of course, join the Star Wars Unlimited Judge Program Discord to join the community discussion of this and much, much more. As always, good luck and have fun.